if you're doing new things, you're going to fail sometimes. And the only way that you will have a sustainable growth mindset is if you continue then to pick yourself up and go at it again.
Welcome to the Leadership Initiative, where we explore the art and science of leadership through thought-provoking conversations with experts, thought leaders, and change makers. Whether you're a seasoned leader or just starting out on your leadership journey, this podcast is designed to provide you with the tools and inspiration you need to lead with purpose and make a meaningful difference.
Great. Well, it's my pleasure today to speak with Michelle Brown, who is principal and founder of a company that I'll describe in a moment. But I want to note that Michelle is, when I was at Notre Dame, we called these double domers. An individual has 2 degrees from The Ohio State University, both an undergraduate and a master's degree. So she is truly a Buckeye. Michelle has a really interesting background and career. Formerly, she was chief operating officer for a much admired company that she helped build called Cover My Meds. She also was in charge of their leadership initiatives for the company. And after that, she decided to kind of put out her own shingle. And as part of that role, Michelle is a coach and organizational development expert. And the company's name is Choose Growth. And what Michelle is going to talk to us about today is really relevant to both of those endeavors. She's going to talk about a growth mindset and its implications for leadership, but also in the second part of this podcast, developing leaders. Michelle is and has remained involved with Ohio State and the College of Business. She currently serves on the Dean's Advisory Council, which is really the main body that advises the dean of the college in all matters pertaining to the college. She has taught in the college and Ohio State and has been very involved with the Fisher Leadership Initiative. So Michelle has given a lot of her time to Ohio State and is a loyal alumna, and we're really happy to have this chance to talk to you, Michelle.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here today.
Great. So let's get right into it. So, Michelle, I'm going to ask some questions and really fascinated in your response to those. And I'll may have some follow-ups as we talk about these things. But the first thing I want to ask you about is kind of what is a growth mindset? So can you explain what a growth mindset is and how adopting this mindset can influence both individual success and the overall performance of an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So I thought maybe a way to kick this off might be to share an example of growth mindset and really how I think sometimes it can be challenging. So when my kids were in elementary school, the flyer came out and it was about lacrosse. So my son said, "I want to go see a lacrosse game." The whole family went and saw 4th graders playing lacrosse. We'd never seen a lacrosse game before. And he said, "I want to play." And so we said, great. A couple years later, my daughter was eligible to play, and I kept encouraging her because I had never played a sport when I was growing up. And I thought, this is a great opportunity. There were things that I didn't learn until adulthood because I didn't learn the winning and losing that happens with sports. And so I really was encouraging her. And she said back to me, "But I've never played lacrosse. I don't know how to play lacrosse." And all those doubts of, I haven't done this before. And of course, I did the mom thing, and that's okay. You're going to learn, you're going to practice, all these things, encouraging her. And then she said, "I don't know, will you be my coach?" And right out of my mouth came, "Well, I don't know because I've never played lacrosse before and I've never been a coach before. And I heard myself saying all the things that I had just, discouraged her. I heard myself being a fixed mindset that because I haven't done it, I can't. And I thought, oh, that's terrible. I can't role model this for my daughter, right? So I said, big deep breath, yes, let's see what we can do. And coached lacrosse for 5 years, and luckily kept my skills just above the girls that I coached. But it was an opportunity to role model that for my daughter, and it got our whole family into doing something that we wouldn't have done otherwise. When I think about growth mindset, it can be really challenging. It can be challenging to quiet our inner doubts, but it's so important because that's how we learn new skills. That's how we take risks. That's how we put ourselves out there. You ask about, is this good for, how does this impact individual success? Well, again, that's the catalyst. I mean, you've got to have that belief that I can change, I can grow, I can do something different, or you're not going to be willing to take the risks necessary to add those skills. You're not going to be willing to make a fool of yourself and to give it a shot. From an organization perspective, I think it's become even more important than it was before, and that really has to do with the rate of change. The answers are not as predictable maybe as they once were, or the path forward is not as straight as it once was, and companies are continuing to have to adjust not only to changes in their own organizations, but competition, and they're asking people to step up in ways, show up for the company in ways that they didn't have to show up before. And that's a big challenge for organizations, I believe, and also really relies on, again, everyone's willingness to say, I'm willing to grow, I'm willing to do something different.
That's great. So let me ask you this, Michelle. So after you, I think, really described well what a growth mindset is, and I love the lacrosse story. That's a hard sport. Like when you're working with organizations, what are some of the strategies you use with leaders to help them acquire a growth mindset so they could listen to you talk about a growth mindset and say, wow, that sounds great. The next question often is like, well, okay, how do I do that? Like, how do I put that into practice?
Yeah. Sounds like a strange start to it, but one thing I actually recommend is that people have an interesting hobby that is complex, that they participate in. And I know you were a climber, as an example. I think this is a great example of what I'm talking about. It's an activity that requires skill and learning and pushing yourselves. There's lots of versions of this out there. It doesn't have to be on the side of a cliff. But I think having a hobby, something that people do on the side that allows them to prove to themselves time and time again, they can learn, they can get better, they can learn, they can get better. Those things translate into their work. The example that I gave, the coaching example, I had not been a coach, so there were all kinds of skills and things that I had to learn, lots of YouTube videos to watch, right, to improve my skill level. That was good for actually my business as well. And I'm always trying to push myself to do something new. I'm trying to learn how to fly fish right now. And my husband and I bought a lathe, and we're wood turning things at home. But there are things that it's an opportunity for us to say, there's skills, there's experts that you go seek out to help you get better. There's trial and error. All those practices translate then back into your day-to-day work. I think there are a couple other really important ones. I would say the next one is asking for feedback. And I think that is so important to get into a habit of early in your career and then figure out how to not lose it. If you can consistently go out there and find out, how did I do on this? Or even better, ask for, I'm working on this skill, or I'm looking to improve in this area. Hey, will you watch me in this meeting and tell me afterwards how I could have done different, how I could have been more effective? If you assume the negative, people are much more likely to give you that feedback. And I think those are really some of the key things to help get people in the right habits for growing. And then maybe the last one I would point out is to find mentors that are skilled in the areas where you want to grow, and learn their growth stories. It's so comforting to hear people who you think highly of talk about when they weren't very good at the skill and they were trying to build. And I think that allows people the freedom to say, okay, it's all right that I'm not there, and keep going.
I think that's great, Michelle. And one of the things that we sometimes unconsciously do in life is we kind of pick the things we're good at, like we have talent at, and we enjoy that because that's good for our self-esteem. But in a work setting, we so often get thrust into these things where we're not prepared. We don't know whether we're good or not. And so I think your examples and what you're talking about is so important, because that's not the point, is it?
Right.
The point is the journey. So people have different levels of talent and experience. But I think what companies are really interested in is like, yeah, we know we're giving you a tough role. We know this may challenge you, but we're interested in your growth and in your journey. And I think it's so powerful what you're talking about, because that's often not at kind of zero input what we strive toward. Most of us want to be good at the things that we're doing. Throwing ourselves into that unknown, that uncertainty, we do a lot to insulate ourselves from that. And I think our ego is a big reason for that. One of my favorite authors is an author of a climbing book, and he calls the ego the 10,000-headed dragon. It's like, it looms so large over things that we undertake, and letting go of that, I think is really hard. And as you said, just one very practical piece of advice is like, throw yourself into something that you haven't done before, that's new to you. And then also, I think, finding mentors, not so much like they're probably better at the craft, whatever that is, than you are, but when they weren't, and what their journey is. I think that's a wonderful, piece of advice for individuals to use. Let me ask you another question, which is about teams. So, in your previous discussion, we talked about how individuals can some practical tools they can use to develop a growth mindset. What about for the teams that individuals lead? What are some ideas that you might have where leaders can help instill that or develop a growth mindset more in the teams that they lead?
Yeah. I think one of the most important things is always to role model the behavior that you're looking for. And so I think that's where you have to start. And so for a leader trying to instill that growth mindset with the team, you've got a role model, being willing to try new things. I had a leader who told me once, Michelle, you need to be willing to waste other people's time. And that sounds like a strange thing to say, but an especially strange thing to say to the chief operating officer. But if we really wanted to be an organization that took risks, that stretched our into new areas, we had to be willing to sometimes stumble. And so really modeling that behavior of being willing to do that yourself, I think, is a great way to show your team what is expected. Sharing your own stories of growth, I think, is also important. I'd also say, as a leader, you need to provide those stretch opportunities to your team. and that, not the kind where the company's going to crash and burn, but the kind that allow people exposure and experience, because I think many of these things people can't learn from just watching. They've got to kind of be in the hot seat and have the experience for themselves before they really understand, all the components to help make them great. Maybe one last one that I would cover is managing your reaction when things go wrong. That's probably one of the places where I see leaders struggle the most. They're all about providing opportunities. They're all about encouraging people to stretch until something goes wrong. And then, to your point from before, ego steps in, and company results, right? We're responsible for our company's results. Those that loom large. And it's very easy when that happens, when you're a leader, to pull back responsibility, to pull back decision-making rights, to say someone's not ready, and to step in yourself and do it yourself. And that, in the long run, doesn't lead to organizational growth and organizational success, because you can't do everything. And it's painful to watch sometimes when somebody's struggling or fumbling to be successful at a new skill that they're adopting. But that's kind of the part of the leader's job, is to work through that, to find that balance in the right way, so that the organization continues to grow and the individuals are ready for what's next.
I think that's really powerful, Michelle, and I've seen it myself, and I've also seen it in other leaders. Like, somebody fails, let me fix this, let me step in. Yeah. And of course, you might be able to do that, but the question is, what lesson am I teaching this individual? It's like they have a ceiling, they can't go further, they need me or someone else to step in. And so in a sort of unintentional but tragic sort of way, we're responsible for constraining them, even though really when we're thinking about it, we're thinking it's their fault. They screwed up. They messed this up, and so forth. But
we're training them what to do next time.
Exactly.
Which is just, let me rescue you.
Yes, and to be afraid of failure, which most of us have a healthy fear for that anyway. And so if the leader adds to that, it's really become difficult for the people to feel like, I feel safe to be able to try things and take risks that you noted. Now, while we're talking about that, let me ask you about a fixed mindset. So we've been talking about a growth mindset, and early on you contrasted kind of the two of them. Let's say you're working with an individual in a company that you work with, and it's just clear based on how you're talking to them, they have a fixed mindset. And let's say you've kind of convinced them about the possibilities of moving to more of a growth mindset. And I think we all have been fixed in how we think about things at times, and it's also probably true leaders naturally differ in this orientation too. How do you help individuals move? Let's say somebody's in a very fixed mindset spot. How do you help them move to a growth mindset?
Yeah. I think one of the most important things you can do is help them discover why now is different. There's lots of things I think you can do, and maybe we'll talk about that in a minute, to help maybe soften the ground before you're asking them to change. But ultimately, I think helping them build the narrative, or why is now the time where they're capable of making this change? Why is now the need greater than ever before? And really just you're giving them the courage, I think, winding them up to get out there and try. And I think the second part of that is, as the leader, you have to insist on progress. You have to insist that people get out, and whether it's they're capable of a little stretch right now or a big stretch, but you have to insist that those things happen so that it becomes habit for people, and then you have things to point back to next time. right? Then you can point back next time when you're asking them of something new, or you're asking them to do something that they've never done before, and you can say, remember when you did this for the first time, and look how good you are at it now. At Cover My Meds, I had an opportunity over and over again to help people do things that they have never, ever, ever done before. And part of that is being in a high-growth organization where we're always doing something new. But part of it's also wanting to make sure you promote from within, making sure those people that you hired early on have the opportunities to grow with the organization. And that meant lots and lots of little conversations to help people make sense of, the things that they needed to do next were different than the things that got them to the spot they're in now.
Well, let's talk about failure, which is a concept you've noted a few times. And I think it's really central for us to grapple with this when we're talking about these concepts of a growth mindset. So how do you help individuals when they're trying to develop a growth mindset? How do you help them deal with failure, like recasting that, in a sense, as a valuable learning opportunity? And more generally, what role does failure play, do you think, in developing a growth mindset?
Yes. So I think failure can be an accelerant if you choose to learn from it. That doesn't mean that I ever like it, right? I can't stand to lose, and I think that's good. And sometimes people reframe as such a, this is such a positive, failure is such a positive thing, all these things you can do. I think it's okay for you to feel terrible about it, and then do something next. Right? I think successes equally you can learn from. But there is something about a failure that can be particularly motivating and at least galvanize your resolve to focus on something, get forward motion. So I do think it plays a critical part in helping us learn. I also think it's just reality. If you're doing new things, you're going to fail sometimes. And the only way that you will have a sustainable growth mindset is if you continue then to pick yourself up and go at it again. Otherwise, eventually you're going to get to the point where the risks aren't worth it. Right? You're not gonna stretch yourself because you don't want to make a mistake, and then you're not going to have any failures, and that's a terrible position to be in. Lots of people struggle, I think, to put themselves out there, and so anything you can do to encourage them along the way, I think, is really important.
I'm going to audibilize a question here, Michelle. And I'm thinking about the skeptic who may be listening to us and saying, that sounds all nice, but I'm accountable for results. Mm-hmm. If I don't produce, I get fired, and you're asking me to lead my team into paths where we may not get the results that we want. And it almost sounds as if somebody could interpret some of this like it's okay to fail. And yet I feel like I work in an organization that won't tolerate that. So how would you deal with somebody who might have that sort of challenge to this whole concept?
Well, the reality is it's always a balance, right? You're always walking kind of that tightrope of being willing to let others learn, grow, and needing to ensure the results for today. And that's just that's the role of the leader, is to find the right balance for your organization. But I would say that in the long term, you cannot do all these things by yourself. And so how do you help make sure that your team is prepared for challenges, is able to take on things when something changes, when you get to go on vacation because the business doesn't fall apart when you're not there. And so you have to figure out how to take calculated risks with others and develop them when it's not, when it's not the most important thing. There's been a lot of football watching in my house lately, as there should be at this time of year. And I was hearing commentators the other day talk about the kicker and making sure to test the kicker early in the season so you knew when it was late in the season and it was really important, are they going to be able to deliver? And I love that concept because that's exactly what organizations should be striving for. Let's test people. Let's get things out there and build their skills when it's not the most important play of the game. Let's do that early. And I think there's a lot of ways to do that. One is to make safe risks, allow people to take safe risks. So, when someone is, let's say, promoted into a sales role, you don't put them on the biggest client first. You put them on the smaller clients first. You have them practice and build up. So there's lots of specific strategies you can use to help make the risks a little safer. But it is a mistake not to help give those opportunities to people, because you will find yourself then making all the decisions, doing all the things, and it's not sustainable.
I think, as you know, the pioneer of this whole concept, Dr. Carol Dweck at Stanford University, she talked about the power of not yet.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I think you had just mentioned like tests. Mm-hmm. We all have these tests in life, and they're not always at the moment that we'd want them to be. But I think as a leader thinking through, I think this will be a good test for this individual. And I think they can learn from that. I think resiliency is really important. You talked about, testing the kicker early in the season. And I think if we're never tested, then the first time we get in that situation, sometimes it may be at an inopportune time. But if we've had experiences to build up for that, then that can build resiliency in us, right? And make us hardy to deal with what's to come.
And when you have employees that you're helping to develop, you don't know what they don't know until they're in the role, until they're making the decisions. And you can't help them until you get there. You can't sit back and read how to do all these things ahead of time and then be perfect at it. You've got to iterate. You've got to be in the role, see them in the role, and see, oh, this is where they need help. That's where they need help. And the only way is, to get out there and give them those experiences and be there to support them then when they do fall, because they will. Great.
Let's talk about kind of the long-term benefits of developing a growth mindset. So what do you think, like, if, particularly in the experiences you had working with individuals and organizations, what do you think of the long-term benefits of cultivating a growth mindset, both maybe for the individual, but also for the organization's capabilities as a whole?
I think the biggest benefit is adaptability. And that's at the organizational level and the individual level. And I say that because you're always going to be asked to do something new, to show up for others in a way that you haven't had to before. And again, whether this is at an organizational level where you're entering a new market, or whether this is an individual who's never managed people before. If you do well, you will be asked to do more, and you will be asked to do new things. And adopting that mindset that I'm good at learning, and I can learn new things, learn new skills, is the real benefit or the precursor, I should say, to being able to get the benefit of being adaptable in the scenarios that you don't know that are going to happen. I think people can develop even track records. It's funny to talk about growth mindset being forward-looking, but say, look backwards. People have track records of growing. And I think you want to look for that track record with individuals, and then you want to cultivate that that track record for people so that they can look back themselves and say, yeah, I see that I have done new things before. When I hired, one of the things that I always felt was really important was looking at progression and roles, but also understanding what did they do that was new and different, even to the point where a lot of times we used what we called Project Day, where there was kind of live skill testing, if you will, during a hiring process. And one of the best things to do is to give people feedback and then have them redo it. Do it again. How did it go? Did they adapt? Did they learn? And you can see live what kind of skills do they have around being willing to stretch, being willing to try and do something new. And it becomes, I think, even more important than what are the skills that they have today. I'd much rather hire someone with the potential to be what we need in 2 years than to be, limited by doing great at this role today.
I think one of the things that Dweck talks about is reinforces a point you made, is that this is not about false feedback, about stroking someone's self-esteem and saying they did great when they didn't do great. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, not yet, try it again and have repetitions. And of course, you were talking about the kicker and so forth. I don't know how many practices, even during a game, they're just kicking all the time, and right. Quarterbacks are throwing, so they're modeling the behavior through practice. And you hear countless coaches who say the game's kind of won on the practice field
before it ever starts.
That's right. Mm-hmm. So before we get to our last question, I'm going to call another audible here to continue the sports metaphor. And I'm going to ask you about faith. It seems to me that maybe implementing growth mindset, it requires a certain amount of faith, both in yourself, but also in other people, because you are, when you're taking risks and you are doing something new, you are kind of projecting into the unknown, right? Right. So what role does that optimistic, faithful sort of mindset play, do you think, in cultivating a growth mindset?
And I think you have to have trust both ways. So we were talking about, as an example with a leader and their team, the leader has to have trust and faith that other people are going to be capable of growth, and the people being asked to grow have to have faith in themselves, right? It's got to go both ways. Yep. So I do think that's a part of it. I also think, frankly, though, it's just practical. And I'm a very practical person, and I would look at this and say, just the reality is, if you want to be able to show up for people next time in the way that they need, you're going to have to push yourself out there and do these things, whether you believe you can or not, is irrelevant. You have to be able to do it. But that doesn't help you. It doesn't help you if you have a fixed mindset. You're going to be much better off if you have the faith and the belief that, yes, you can do that.
I've been belaying other climbers before, and they want to come down. They're like midway up a route, and it's like, no, not yet. I think you can do this, and I think you should try.
One more foothold.
Yes. And in fact, one of my mentors talks about one more move, that mindset, like one more. Don't know if you can get to the top of this route or not, but just give it one more move and give it everything you have. And of course, what you find with that is that, wow, I did that, and that's very empowering. And now I think I can try another, and now I think I can try another. So it's kind of one step at a time.
Exactly.
Yep. So my last question in this segment for you, Michelle, focuses on new leaders, so people who are kind of still honing their leadership skill set. What sort of advice would you give to aspiring leaders or people who are relatively new to leadership roles who want to develop their growth mindset early in their careers? Are there specific habits or practices that can help them with the mindset?
The habit I think that's most impactful is asking others for feedback on your performance. And I'll actually share a story with you. I had an opportunity to work with a lot of really amazing individuals that had a growth mindset. And one of the ones that I enjoy is a story of a young girl. She was a basketball player in middle school, riding home with her dad in the car after a not-so-good game. And she bursts into tears, and the dad says, "What's wrong?" She said, "You don't love me." Well, that's pretty striking, right? And so the dad reassures her, "Of course, I love you. Why do you say that?" And she said, "Because you're not yelling at me after the game like you yell at my older brothers who play basketball." And in her world, the definition of love was, you tell me what I'm doing wrong. You help me get better because you know how much I care about this. I love that story because it helps really show, and by the way, she has an incredible work ethic, an incredible drive to succeed, but it shows how important to her it was to kind of get that feedback to improve. That is a growth mindset. Right? That is, I'm going to get better at these things. And by the way, what did he do next? He yelled at her the rest of the way home in the car, which was perfect, and probably not yelled, but gave her feedback the rest of the way home in the car. I think that's the most important thing that people can do, is really kind of push others to give them feedback along the way so that they can get better. People are very fearful of that. And I've coached now a lot of leaders, and one of the things they fear most is providing feedback or criticism to their team. You know, they want their team to be optimistic about the future. What if I throw them off their game? What if I don't know how to handle their reaction to this? And so it is very hard to get people to give you feedback, and developing that people around you that are willing to do it, but developing your skill in how to ask for it, I think is an important way you can kind of keep in the driver's seat of your development, because you're going to encounter new things, and if you can build that habit of asking for feedback along the way, I think you're going to have a much easier time increasing your skills.
Great. Well, Michelle, that ends this segment. Thank you so much. Very interesting and enjoyable conversation.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks again for listening. This podcast is presented by the Max M. Fisher College of Business at The Ohio State University. For more episodes, find us on Apple, Google, or podcast.osu.edu/leadership initiative. See you next time.